course. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this it's actually 4-week program, but it's 8-session program on the shamatha practice, particularly using the mindfulness of breathing. So this program, again, will be over 8 90-minute sessions. So it's every Tuesday and Thursday now, 7 till 8:30 for the next 4 weeks. And the structure of the session will be, generally I'll start with a review from the previous session, a meditation, then I'll give presentation of the new topic, another meditation, and then at the end some Q&A to finish the session. And we're going to be following this mindfulness of breathing, and we can see the schedule there. We'll start in this session with a little bit of an introduction into this program. And then we'll be doing 2 sessions doing the mindfulness of breathing in what's called the full body. In particular, in session 3, introducing meditating using the Shavasana posture. And then 2 sessions on focusing on the abdomen, 2 sessions at the nostrils, and then integrating into daily life as the last session. Recommended reading for this program is The Attention Revolution, a shamatha book by Alan Wallace. So I'll be following quite closely a lot of the things he covers in that book. Course materials, I think Miffy's hopefully sent out the 3 handouts for this course. There's a color chart for the 9 stages to shamatha, a chart giving all the detail, and then a black and white one with explanations of the various points there. If you've printed them out, it'll be good because we'll be referring to them now and again, but during this program, but particularly in sessions 4 and 5, we'll be going through these 9 stages in some detail. So it would be helpful to have them handy during those 2 sessions in particular. So that brings us to the first session, session 1, an introduction into this program. What we're going to cover in this session, we'll be starting with a meditation in terms of setting the motivation for this session and for this course. Then we'll be looking at what is shamatha, why is shamatha practice important. We'll be looking at how to train in shamatha. And then in this particular session, the topic will be how to prepare body, speech, and mind in terms of how to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of each meditation session. And that's what the meditation is going to be for this session later, is really the preparation at the beginning of meditation. And then, as Miffy mentioned, we'll have some time for question answer at the end of the session. So let's begin. And we'll begin with a meditation, setting the motivation. So we'll make it quite short, about 10 minutes. And for all the meditations, what I'll do is I'll switch my webcam off because not to distract you. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body. And simply becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest. Resting in the present moment. Resting in stillness. Releasing any thoughts that may arise. And then think about your motivation for attending this session, for attending this course. Then try to make your motivation as expansive as possible. And if possible, try to also include others in your motivation. The highest motivation is the motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others. And so keeping your motivation in mind, we can finish the meditation and we can begin our discussions here this evening. So the first topic is, what is shamatha? Shamatha is a Sanskrit term which we can divide into two parts. The first part, shama, means calm, a mind that is calm, not discursive, not full of thoughts. And ta means to remain or abide. So it's often translated as calm abiding. So we're talking about a mind that's not only calm, but it's abiding, i.e. focused single-pointedly on an object. So we're talking about cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind, cultivating single-pointed concentration. Now, in a lot of modern traditions, we often hear about mindfulness, and we're often hear we're doing mindfulness practice. Here in the Buddhist context, mindfulness is not so much a practice, but rather it's a tool we use in practice. And in fact, it's the main tool we use in this shamatha practice. And we'll look at this mindfulness in much more detail later in session 3 of this course. And then there's another term that often comes up in this context a lot, and that is another Sanskrit term, samadhi, which we can also divide into two parts. The prefix sam means totally, and di means to place. So we're talking about totally placing the mind. And so this is often translated as either concentration or meditative stabilization. And any of you who are a little bit familiar with Tibetan terms, in Tibetan, this is Tingné Zin, which also literally means to hold closely, to hold clearly. Now, we can talk about many levels of concentration or samadhi that we can cultivate. The one that we are focusing on here in this course is a level of concentration called shamatha. And this is particularly emphasized in Mahayana traditions, in Mahayana Buddhist traditions. Whereas there's another level of samadhi, levels of samadhi called the 4 levels of jhana. Jhana is a Sanskrit term, in Tibetan samten. These are particularly emphasized in the Theravada Buddhist traditions. So therefore, often in Mahayana Buddhist traditions, when we talk about doing concentration practice, we simply say we're doing shamatha practice. Whereas in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, when they talk about doing concentration practice, they often say we're doing jhana practice. So it's a different level of concentration, but it's the same practice. And then where there are 4 higher levels of concentration or samadhi called 4 levels of samapati. In Tibetan Nyomjuk, these are often translated as some sort of absorptions. So these are very high levels of concentration. So there are many levels of concentration we can cultivate in the Buddhist path. And the one we're focusing on here is this level of concentration called shamatha. So why is this shamatha practice important? We can look at the importance of shamatha practice first in terms of everyday life. And here we begin with a quote from the recommended reading, Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace. And he says, "Few things affect our lives more than our faculty of attention. If we can't focus our attention, we can't do anything well. We can't study, listen, converse with others, work, play, or even sleep well when our attention is impaired." And then also here we have quite a well-known quote from the great Indian Buddhist master from the 8th century, Shantideva, who says, "Those with a distracted mind are trapped in the jaws of the mental afflictions." So therefore, this shamatha practice is certainly important in everyday life in terms of developing our attention skills. Because if we have very poor attention skills, and unfortunately in the modern society, that's often the case, that our attention skills are very poor, which means we're not very effective in anything we do in our life. And that predisposes us to much more agitation and stress, and to get caught up in much more mental imbalance, craving, attachment, and so forth, as we saw in the quote from Shantideva, that if we have a distracted mind, we are really trapped in the jaws of these sorts of mental afflictions. We're more predisposed to all sorts of mental afflictions, craving, attachment, jealousy, anger, frustration coming up in our mind. So much more mental imbalance. And therefore we often end up becoming the slaves of our mind, getting caught up not only in our mental afflictions, but in our thoughts and memories and so forth as well. And due to this as well, we don't tend to enjoy simple pleasures in life as much as we could. And as we often see in the modern world, that also leads to a lot of sleep problems and physical health problems. So I think a lot of modern day physical health problems are related to this sort of thing, are related to a lot of these mental afflictions and so forth that arise in our mind, a lot of anger issues and so forth. So if we can develop good attention skills through doing the shamatha practice, of course, we'll be much more effective in everything we do, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance. And instead of being the slaves of our mind, we'll become the masters of our mind. We'll enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. And often we also end up with a lot of sleep and physical health benefits as well. But also we can talk about why the shamatha practice is important in terms of the pursuit of happiness. And here we'll begin again with a quote from His Holiness Dalai Lama. He says, "I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness." But then, of course, if we talk about happiness, we need to know what we mean by that. What is happiness? And here we can talk about at least 2 types of happiness. Firstly, there is what's called temporal happiness, which is simply another name for our pleasurable experiences. So this type of happiness is what's called a stimulus-based happiness, meaning we have some sort of stimulus and as a result, we have a pleasurable experience. So therefore, it's often called conditioned happiness, meaning we need certain conditions to come together to have these pleasurable experiences. And so therefore, by its nature, this type of happiness is transient, because when the stimulus finishes, the happiness experience finishes. It's unsustainable, because again, the stimulus will finish. It's unreliable, because if we don't have the stimulus, we don't have the pleasurable experience. And if we look closely at our pleasurable experiences, we'll come to appreciate they're not really even in the nature of happiness. Because if our pleasurable experiences were in the nature of happiness, it would mean that the more we engaged in pleasurable experiences, the more happy we should become. But we know from our own experiences that if we overindulge in our pleasant experiences, not only don't they make us more happy, usually they end up inducing a lot of unnecessary suffering. Sort of a classic example there, of course, is if we're eating too much of our favorite dessert, we just get indigestion, or spending too long out in the nice warm sunshine, we just get dehydrated and sunburned. So this type of happiness, the temporal happiness or pleasurable experiences, is all about really what we can get from the world. Whereas genuine happiness or inner well-being is not a stimulus-based happiness, meaning it's a state of well-being that does not require any particular stimulus to be present for us to be in this state. So therefore, it's often termed unconditioned happiness. And so therefore, this genuine happiness or inner well-being is stable, it's sustainable, it's reliable, and it is in the nature of happiness. And this is much more about what we can bring to the world rather than what we can get from the world. So how do we achieve this genuine happiness or inner well-being? We'll look at shortly. But before that, a couple of points to mention. First is that we tend to mistake pleasure for genuine happiness. In other words, we tend to hope that our pleasurable experiences are somehow going to fulfill us and give us some sort of lasting happiness, which means that leads us to have craving and attachment to our pleasurable experiences. And that craving and attachment for pleasurable experiences or pleasure often leads to a lot of worry and anxiety about not getting it, not getting enough of it, or potentially losing it. And then also it can lead to frustration when we don't get it, and overindulging when we do get it. And often it leads to a lot of dissatisfaction and disappointment when things don't live up to our expectations. And then it often leads to more craving, because we think that the reason that we're not fully satisfied is we just didn't get enough of that thing, so I need to have more of that thing. So it sort of ends up in a vicious loop. And then also that craving and attachment leads us to stop enjoying things that we used to enjoy. And this we know this well from our own experience. If there's certain thing that we enjoy, but we get it too often, then after some time, craving and attachment goes, boring, that's not good enough anymore, because I want something bigger, better, and different. So craving and attachment is never satisfied and ends up, again, we not enjoy the things we used to, because at some point craving and attachment then tells us that's boring and it's not enjoyable anymore. Now, if we don't mistake pleasure for genuine happiness, then we can strive for that genuine happiness, that inner well-being, and at the same time enjoy our pleasurable experiences much more. Because if we can understand there are these two types of happiness, and we can really appreciate that our pleasurable experiences are never going to fulfill us, never give us any lasting genuine happiness, then we'll be able to let go of craving and attachment for them, which means we'll actually enjoy them much more than we do now, because that craving and attachment interferes with our enjoyment of our pleasurable experiences. But of course, what we need to remember here, it's not a choice. It's not like either we go for pleasurable experiences or we go for genuine happiness. And unfortunately, that's sometimes what people think, particularly when people come into contact with Buddhism, and we hear about this genuine happiness, and we hear about this idea of renunciation. And renunciation, which of course is the entry point into the Buddhist spiritual path, is often presented as giving up the 8 worldly concerns. And the 8 worldly concerns are 4 things, 4 pairs, one thing we want and one thing we don't want. And so The first pair is gain and loss. So we tend to feel as if we have more stuff, gain is material possessions and wealth and so forth. We feel like that's the source of happiness, that if we have more stuff and more wealth, we'll be more happy. So we put a lot of effort in trying to accumulate more material possessions and wealth. And we feel like as if we don't have those things, that's going to really be the source of suffering. So we put a lot of effort into avoiding losing those things. But also, we feel as if that we tend to equate, again, pleasure with happiness. So we feel like if we have more pleasure, we'll be more happy. So we put a lot of effort into gaining pleasurable experiences. And we tend to equate pain with suffering. And so therefore, we tend to try and avoid any painful situations because we believe that is suffering. And then also we tend to feel it's important for our happiness what people are saying about us. So therefore, we try and do a lot of things to receive praise, that people say good things about us. And we try to avoid being blamed for anything because we believe that that's going to be a source of a lot of suffering. But also important for our happiness, we often feel it's important what people are thinking about us. So we tend to do a lot of things to ensure that we have good reputation, that people acknowledge us, think good about us. And we try to avoid at all costs having a bad reputation because we believe that's going to produce a lot of suffering. So we try and get those four things on the left, and we try to avoid the four things on the right, because the four things on the left seem to be the source of happiness. The four things on the right seem to be the source of suffering. And so here then, when we talk about in the Buddhist teachings, we hear this word renunciation, and it talks about giving up the 8 worldly concerns if we really want to enter the Buddhist path. And so then we often mistakenly think we need to give up wealth, money, pleasure, praise, and good reputation, because isn't that what giving up the 8 worldly concerns is about? No. In fact, it's not. We're not trying to give up the 8 worldly things. We're trying to give up the 8 worldly concerns. And concerns here really means to believe that the things on the left are the source of happiness and the things on the right are the source of suffering. In other words, what we are to give up is an unhealthy attitude to these things. In other words, to give up attachment to pleasure and aversion to pain. That's what renunciation is about. So it's not a choice. It's not like we have to abandon pleasure. Whether or not we have pleasurable experiences is not the issue. The issue is our attitude towards these pleasurable experiences. And so renunciation is really about giving up the craving and attachment, hoping that pleasure, gain, praise, good reputation is going to make us happy, that it's the source of our happiness. But actually this word renunciation, which means renounce or give up, is not really a very good translation. Somehow someone decided that this was a good word many years ago and it sort of stuck. Whereas the original Sanskrit term here is nisarana. Ni, the prefix ni means out of, away from, and sarana means to move. So nisarana means to move out of, away from suffering towards liberation from suffering. And the Tibetan word here is ne chung, very similar. Ne means definite, chung means to emerge. So we're talking here about definite emergence, having the aspiration to definitely emerge from suffering, to be liberated from suffering. So actually, renunciation is really the aspiration for liberation from suffering. So that's how we really should understand this word renunciation. But in terms of giving up the 8 worldly concerns, then we often get this mistaken idea that if we are a good Buddhist, we need to give up money, pleasure, praise, good reputation. Again, whether or not we have these things is not the issue. What we are to give up or let go of is craving and attachment to them. So then in terms of genuine happiness, here we'll have a quote from the Buddha. And the Buddha says that find out what really constitutes true well-being and based on this understanding, pursue it. Because here we're trying to work out how shamatha practice is important for the pursuit of genuine happiness. So here, true well-being or genuine happiness, in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, we talk about this, the goal of nirvana. And how to pursue that, the presentation within Theravada traditions, the classic presentation, is a presentation of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is how we pursue genuine happiness, a state of liberation from suffering, a state of nirvana. Whereas in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, then when we talk about true well-being, we're really talking about the goal of enlightenment. And here then, how to pursue that, how do we achieve the goal of enlightenment, is through what's called the 6 perfections, these 6 practices. Now, whether we're talking about the Noble Eightfold Path or the 6 perfections, we're really talking about the same 3 core areas of practice called the 3 higher trainings, which are listed here, and we see them. The first is ethics, or shila in Sanskrit, avoiding harmful behavior. On that basis, we engage in the concentration practice. And so here, concentration is in Sanskrit samadhi. And here we talk about these levels of concentration of shamatha, or in the Theravada jhana. And then on that basis, we engage in the wisdom practice, or prajna. Now, this wisdom practice is often referred to using a very similar term in Sanskrit, vipassana, or in Pali, vipassana, which really means insight or special insight. Now, these Noble Eightfold Path and 6 perfections are condensed down into these 3 higher trainings. So let's have a look at how they are condensed down into these 3 higher trainings. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th in the list, right speech, right action, right livelihood, are subsumed as ethics. Then 6, 7, and 8, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, can be subsumed as concentration. And then the first 2 of the Noble Eightfold Path, right view and right thought, are subsumed as wisdom. Whereas in the 6 perfections, the first 3 of generosity, ethics, and patience can be subsumed as ethics. Then we have joyous effort there. The 5th is concentration, and the 6th is wisdom. And joyous effort is something we need to apply to all 3 areas. So what we see here is that whether we are talking about Theravada Buddhist traditions, the goal of nirvana, or whether we're talking about the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, the goal of enlightenment, we're talking about the same 3 core areas of practice of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And then we see in the shamatha chart that we're going to be looking at much later. If you have it handy, you'll see this at the top of your shamatha chart. The last diagram on the top right-hand corner there is talking about vipassana, actually wisdom practice. And there the description, it's in Tibetan, but the translation of that says, the root of samsara is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana, observing emptiness. So here, these 3 higher trainings, these 3 core areas of practice that we need to engage in the Mahayana to find that genuine happiness, that inner true well-being, is ethics, concentration practice of shamatha, and then the wisdom practice, or the vipassana practice, of emptiness. So therefore, if we want to find genuine happiness or well-being, then this shamatha practice is very important. Because without this shamatha practice, our mind will not be stable and clear enough to be able to penetrate the nature of reality. Because it's through this practice of emptiness, coming to realize the nature of reality, that we can find genuine happiness. Because the Buddhist assertion is that the root cause of all of our mental afflictions and suffering is our distorted view of reality. And so if we want to overcome those mental afflictions and suffering and find that genuine happiness, we need to overcome that distorted view. And we can only do that by gaining a direct insight into nature of reality, a direct insight into emptiness. And to be able to gain a direct insight into emptiness, we need a calm, clear, focused mind. We need the mind of shamatha. So hence, the root of samsara is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana, observing emptiness. So therefore, in terms of genuine happiness, shamatha practice is also essential. So then, how to train in shamatha? Shamatha training. So there are a number of points that we're going to go through in this 8-session program. The first point here is prerequisites. Prerequisites has to do with how to set up our life, or how to build a framework of our life to support this practice. And so we're going to look at these prerequisites for shamatha training in session 7 in this program. And then in terms of the actual shamatha practice, any practice, of course, always has 2 parts: meditation and then integrating into daily life. So in terms of shamatha meditation, then of course, any meditation also has 2 parts: preparation and then the actual meditation. Preparation is what to do at the beginning of a session to prepare ourselves well. So here we can talk about preparing body, speech, and mind. And this is going to be the main topic for this session. In terms of the actual shamatha meditation, there are 4 topics that I would like to cover during this course. First, what qualities are we trying to cultivate in this shamatha training, this shamatha practice? We'll look at that in the next session. Similarly, what object should we focus on in this practice? Because remember, shamatha practice is a concentration practice. We're trying to cultivate single-pointed attention, single-pointed concentration. So we're focusing on a single object, but what object should we focus on? So that also we're going to look at in the next session. Then what tools do we use in this shamatha practice? So we'll look at that in session 3. One of those tools, of course, we mentioned already, mindfulness. And we'll look at that in more detail in session 3. And then also, what sorts of faults can arise in this practice and how do we overcome them? So we'll look at that also in session 3. And then in terms of integrating this shamatha practice into daily life, we'll cover that topic in the last session, in session 8. And then, as with any training, it would be good to have some sort of map to show us what is the goal and what are the steps that we go through to get to that goal. So therefore, we're going to look at the stages of progress using this classic 9-stage model to shamatha in session 4 and 5. It's a roadmap for the shamatha practice to know where we are on the way to shamatha and have we deviated, have we gone astray, or are we still heading in the right direction in our practice? So we'll look at that in session 4 and 5. So there's some of the topics that we'll be covering in these 8 sessions of this shamatha training. So let's now have a look at preparing body, speech, and mind. So this is, of course, what we do at the beginning of every meditation session, not just shamatha meditation, but every meditation session. And preparing is important. Just like if you're going to, say, run a 100-meter sprint, but you don't warm up, then I think the 100-meter sprint is probably not going to go very well. Maybe you tear a muscle or something. Likewise, if we don't prepare well at the beginning of a meditation, then the actual meditation probably is not going to go very well. And unfortunately, this is where often people let themselves down in their meditation practice, is that they sit down and they just launch straight into the actual meditation, and then they wonder why their meditation is not going very well. So therefore, it's very important to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of every meditation session. And here we can talk about preparing body, speech, and mind. In terms of preparing the body, we're really talking about posture. So here we see a classic presentation, particularly within Tibetan Buddhism, of what's called the 7-point meditation posture. 7 points to address in terms of setting up a good posture for meditation. So let's briefly have a look at these points. I think for many of you, these are already very familiar, but just to review them anyway. So first, what to do with the legs. So the recommended ideal posture with the legs is what's called the full lotus, where you are having one foot on top of either thigh. So I think for many of us in the modern world, we're not very flexible. Full lotus is not really an option. So we end up, most of us end up sitting cross-legged. But some of us have sort of knee problems, and sitting cross-legged is very painful. So some alternatives to sitting cross-legged is to use a meditation stool, which is a low stool where you can tuck your legs underneath the stool. So some people find that very good for the legs. Some other people prefer just to sit in a chair, so that's quite okay. But some people even have sort of back problems and find that even sitting in a chair is not very comfortable, quite painful. So then another option, which we're going to look at in session 3 of this program, is using the Shavasana or corpse posture for meditating. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, what to do with the hands? Now, the classic presentation, particularly again in Tibetan Buddhism, is that you place your right palm in your left, your thumbs touching, and then you rest that on your lap. If you don't find that very comfortable, then you can just rest your hands on the knees. And the symbolism here is that the left side is considered to be wisdom, the right side compassion, and the thumbs touching is the practicing wisdom and compassion together. So that's the symbolism, and that's sort of the classic presentation of what to do with the hands, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism. Now, the third point is to keep the back nice and straight, because if it was sort of hunching over, of course, we're probably just going to fall into dullness. The shoulders, keep them level and relaxed. The head slightly tilted forward, not too far forward, we're getting drowsy, too up, maybe get agitated. The eyes, the general recommendation for meditation is to have the eyes slightly open. Because if we have them closed, generally we associate closed eyes with sleep. So if we close our eyes in meditation, probably we're going to get very dull and drowsy. Now here we can be flexible, particularly as a beginner, because some people, or in fact quite a lot of people in the modern world, tend to be, due to the lifestyle and bombarded by stimulus, tend to be quite agitated. And so they find that, and this is myself included when I began meditating, that having the eyes slightly open, letting some light in, just was making me too agitated. So therefore, if you're the type of person that more easily gets quite agitated than dull, then you might like to experiment with having the eyes lightly closed. However, if you're the sort of person that naturally tends to be more dull than agitated, I wouldn't recommend meditating with eyes closed. You're just going to get dull and drowsy. And then also you can meditate with your eyes just naturally open. That's also a possibility as well. So these are some alternatives, particularly again, if you tend to get very dull, you might like to even have them naturally open. You might find that helps to overcome dullness and drowsiness. So that's something we can experiment, particularly in this sort of shamatha practice, observing the breath. Just use the variation of the eyes that seems to work best for you. And then the last point is the jaw, to keep it nice and relaxed. And sometimes here in the text, it talks about putting the tongue against the upper palate. And the instruction there is because sometimes we generate a lot of saliva in the mouth and continually swallowing that, and that's a bit of a distraction. So if you have your tongue against the upper palate behind the upper teeth, that can reduce the amount of saliva. But of course, if we don't need to do that if we don't have that issue, so we can ignore that advice otherwise. So here, in terms of this 7-point posture, the two most important things is to keep the back nice and straight, and then allow the entire body to become completely relaxed. So therefore here, in preparing the body, we see the instruction at the top is settling the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. A vigilant posture is to keep the back straight, and stillness means that once we've set up a good posture, then to keep the body as still as possible. to avoid any unnecessary movement, because often in meditation, people are fidgeting and scratching and itching. And of course, that's just giving distraction. So once we've established the back straight, body relaxed, good posture, then let the body be as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. Of course, if you're sitting and you're getting strong knee pain, then at some point you may need to adjust your posture, because if you have strong pain, then your attention is just going to go there. So that's preparing the body. Preparing the speech here. The speech, we're not talking about verbal speech, we're talking about mental speech, inner speech. And sometimes we come into meditation with a lot of this blah, blah, blah going on, particularly sometimes we come in a lot of agitation, a lot of negativity and frustration and so forth. And when we come into the meditation in that state, it's very difficult to settle and very difficult to set a good motivation. So what we can do here in the first part of preparing speech is do a little breathing exercise. And there are different options here in different traditions. Some traditions talk about taking 3 deep breaths. Some traditions talk about counting 21 breaths. And in Tibetan Buddhism, we often hear about this 9-round breathing exercise, which often involves a lot of visualizations and channels and so forth. But regardless of the different type of breathing exercise, they all here at this point serve the same purpose. By focusing on a breathing exercise, we can let go of that mental chit-chat, particularly that negativity in the mind, and bring the mind into a neutral state, because the breath is a neutral object. And also, if we're doing the 3 deep breaths, it can also to help release some tension in the body as well. And then part of the preparing speech is then just let the breath settle into its natural rhythm. Just let the breathing settle down. Of course, without trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. So in this practice, we're not trying to control the breath in any way. We're not trying to make the breath subtle or shallow or rhythmic or anything. Just let the breathing do whatever it wants. And you'll find also, of course, there's a very strong correlation with the breath and the mind. The more coarse the breath, the more agitated the mind tends to be. The more the breath settles down, the more the mind settles down as well. So by allowing the breathing just to settle into its natural rhythm, let it flow effortlessly, the inner speech of the mind begins to settle as well. And then we move into preparing the mind. And 2 things here. First, of course, is setting a positive motivation. Make it as expansive as possible. Try to include others. Of course, here in the Mahayana tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, the highest motivation is the motivation of bodhicitta. And then the second point is, in preparing the mind, allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. We tend to be living in the past and the future. In particular in meditation, when we sit down to meditate, we're often already at the beginning in the future in terms of expectation. I hope this happens. I hope that doesn't happen. I wonder what's going to happen in this meditation. So already we're going into the future. So to let go of all of those things and just let the mind come to rest in the present moment. And if we're resting in the present moment, then in that present moment, the mind is still, just resting in that stillness. So therefore, in terms of preparing the mind, we see at the bottom here, settling the mind into a state of relaxation, stillness, and clarity. So allowing the mind to rest in that stillness, remaining clear. Because generally in our life, when we tend to rest physically or mentally, we become very dull. So we're not doing that here. In relaxing body and mind, we're not allowing ourselves to sink into some sort of dullness or drowsiness. So remain in that clarity, allow the mind to relax, to be still, and to be clear. So that's preparing body, speech, and mind. And so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to do a 15-minute meditation where we're going to step through these 3 stages very slowly, preparing body, speech, and mind. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin that meditation now. And again, I'll switch off the video so as not to distract you, particularly if you have your eyes open during the meditation. We begin by preparing the body. So simply allowing your awareness to descend into the body, right down to the ground. Becoming aware of the sensations where your body is touching the cushion or the chair. And then allow your awareness to rise up and fill the entire space of your body. And simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And bringing your attention to the area of your face and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. And so in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And having established a good posture, keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. And now take 3 slow, deep breaths, maintaining awareness of sensations throughout the body as you breathe. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing the breath to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then give yourself permission to let go of any hopes or fears, worries or concerns about the past or the future. To give yourself permission to let go of all of these things for the duration of this short meditation. And simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in stillness. Now, from that stillness, start to become aware of the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Noticing any sensations associated with the breathing. Now, if you get distracted from the breath, the first thing to do is simply relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to observing the breath, noticing any sensations in the body associated with the breath. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So that brings us to Q&A. So I think someone's got some questions, hopefully.
So Glenn, I'll give people a chance to write something into the chat, but I've got a couple of questions already for you.
Sure.
One's just a simple one about the posture, about having the eyes just kind of resting naturally open.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of like how your eyes go naturally when you're deep in thought?
What do you mean by that?
Um,
Well, I mean, of course, sometimes when like that, one thing, I think the main thing is not to strain the eyes.
yeah,
So, I mean, like now, I mean, this is generally how I meditate, just like this. Like I'm looking at something, but I'm not. It's like just disconnected from the visual.
yeah, yeah, because when you're deep in thought, your eyes are open still, but you're not looking outwards.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, like sometimes you're right, or daydreaming, where we're daydreaming and our eyes are open, we're not even aware of what's in front of us. So it's a little bit like that, of course, but we're not daydreaming in meditation. We're focusing on the object. So for the breath practice, I think it's sort of like we can play with that, but certainly, as we're going to see in the next session, when we use some other objects for shamatha, where we're observing the mind and resting in awareness, there the instruction is very much recommended to have the eyes open for a number of reasons. Of course, one is the with more clarity. With the eyes closed, we naturally fall into dullness and drowsiness. But another thing is that, you know, even though with the eyes open, we're not really looking at anything, at our level, the visual is still somewhat engaged, even though we're not really looking at anything, which means, and of course, the visual only happens in the present moment. So another advantage is that what you'll find is that with the eyes open, even though we're not looking at anything, it helps to lock us more into the present moment. It's much easier to drift off into the past and future with the eyes closed. And also another thing is that, and this is a little bit related to the Vipassana, is that particularly this Vipassana practice of emptiness, is that basically one way of talking about emptiness is this wisdom of non-duality. There's no subject-object duality. Here in shamatha practice, if we are meditating with eyes closed, we tend to have a strong sense that there's a me in here and a world out there. So that sense of duality is strengthened. Whereas if we have the eyes open, again, we're not really looking at anything, but with the eyes open, particularly if we have them naturally open, this false sense of duality starts to break down a little bit, particularly as the mind calms down. So what we will find is that even in shamatha practice with eyes open, we start to break a little bit this strong grasping to subject-object duality, which means that that's going to help us later when we move into Vipassana practice. So there's a number of reasons. But again, I would recommend as a beginner doing this breath practice, use the variation of the eyes that works best for you. Because some people are extremely agitated and they find that having the eyes even slightly open is just too much light and they just get more agitated. Then you may just use the eyes closed. So I would experiment for this practice.
And there's a question that I also relate to about, I start falling, this is from Skylark, I start falling asleep when I'm in a teaching or doing meditation. So how do I fix that? It's almost impossible to get me out of that funk once I'm in it.
Right. Good question. Well, they're not online, but usually when someone asks me that question, I want to dig a little bit deeper as to the reasons for that. And so I often ask, do you fall into that state when you're watching an interesting program on TV at night? Generally not.
Sometimes,
So
yes.
it's just rhetorical. It's a rhetorical question. But basically, what my point is that, you know, if we're at home in the evening and there's a boring program on TV, what happens? We switch off, we maybe doze off. But if there's something very interesting on TV, even if we're a little bit tired, we're sort of glued to the TV, aren't we? I mean, there's not much dullness and drowsiness going on when we're seeing our favorite program on TV, the next installment of whatever. So the one main reason is, not the only one, but one main reason we fall into dullness and so forth, listening to things or meditating, is we're not enthusiastic. And if we're not enthusiastic, then what happens is we go into dullness and drowsiness because our mind goes, this is boring. I'm not interesting. So one important thing, and that's what we looked at what is the importance of the shamatha practice, is to really reflect on that, is to really reflect on the fact that this practice is going to bring us enormous benefits. In daily life, it's going to bring us all of those enormous benefits that we looked at earlier. And in terms of a spiritual path, shamatha is the gateway to genuine happiness. And so if we can really appreciate those benefits of this sort of practice, we're going to be very enthusiastic about it. If we're very enthusiastic about it, we're not going to get dull or drowsy listening to explanations. We're not going to get dull or drowsy in meditation. So that's one reason, one main reason, not the only one. Another one, of course, is that many of us in the modern world have very busy, hectic lives. We never have enough time for everything. And so what we tend to cut is we cut sleep from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 hours. And then we somehow manage to get by on that. And then, of course, here in the evening, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening, had a busy day at work. And now we come along and the tiredness is kicking in. And of course, here in meditation, the preparation is to relax the body and mind. And so during the day, we've been tired, but we've maybe drunk lots of coffee to keep alert. Maybe we've got really tense focus at work to keep alert. And then suddenly the instruction is to relax, and we relax and our body goes, oh, thank you. And then we collapse and we fall asleep. So I see this all the time when I'm running like a residential program on a weekend or so forth. The first day, so many people are sort of nodding off, you know, because we're not getting enough sleep. So I think that's important. So I think these are probably the two most important things in terms of getting very dull and drowsy, listening to explanations and meditating, is we just simply don't get enough sleep. And then we're not really enthusiastic about it. We're sort of doing it because someone told it it's maybe good for us or so forth, but we don't really appreciate it.
That's great, thank you. Then on a totally different tack, Andrew's asked, what are your thoughts on Tumo breathing meditation?
What are my thoughts on Tumo breathing meditation? You mean in this context or in general?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
In general.
In general, Tumo breathing meditation. I mean, of course, Tumo is a completion stage practice. It's like way, way up there. It's like one of the highest practices we can do in Tantra. So, you know, does that mean we don't do it? Not necessarily, but I think we need to be careful we don't put the cart before the horse. And do things in a methodical way. So of course, if we're only trying to do Tumo meditation, particularly if we don't have any attention skills, I think the Tumo meditation, we can spend a lot of time on it and not really get anywhere. So can we sort of do a little bit of it if we have a skillful teacher? I mean, Lama Yeshe was teaching a lot of Tumo, I think, to the hippies in the 70s, but he had a special purpose for it. I think he was trying to, you know, get them to see that they can have something happening in meditation rather than having to take LSD and other hallucinogenics. So he was trying to get them that way. But I think that things like Tumo meditation, of course, have their place. But again, in the whole scheme of things, Tumo is like a extremely high level of practice. And I think if we really want to make benefit of that, then we need to have the basis. And the basis, of course, well, a basis of everything is ethics. Then comes this shamatha practice, to have a calm, clear, focused mind. And then on that basis, we engage in vipassana practice. So all three of those are an essential foundation for anything in Tantra, anything, of course, including bodhicitta as well. Then having those as a basis, then I think practices such as Tumo can be much more effective and be very helpful.
Okay, and then Stephen's asked, meditation is an active practice rather than a relaxation practice?
Again, it depends what we mean by active. I'm not sure what he means by the word active in this context.
Kind of as opposed, like, you know, as opposed to just relaxing, kind of.
Okay. And this is something that's going to come up in the next session when we talk about qualities, is that in our daily life, we tend to be either alert, i.e. active and tense, or we're relaxed and dull. I mean, we tend to oscillate between those two. When we're active and alert, we tend to be very tense. And then when we relax, we become very dull. So meditation is combining those two. We are basically relaxing and alert at the same time. So that's something very new for us. Because remember, shamatha is the basis of vipassana. And so in vipassana, we're investigating. So that's active, you know, because we need to investigate the nature of reality. How do things exist? We don't just sit there and relax. We have to actively investigate. So that's what's called analytical style of meditation. But the basis of analytical is stabilizing meditation, is shamatha practice, which the basis of shamatha, as we're going to see tomorrow, is relaxation. So we're trying to combine those two. We're trying to be completely relaxed and at the same time alert. And in shamatha, alert in terms of being completely, clearly focused on the object. In vipassana, alert meaning investigating nature of reality.
Okay, and so kind of like being present.
Present for sure. I mean, yeah, we need to be present 24/7.
Then Glenn, I've also got a question when you were talking about the 8 worldly concerns and, you know, renunciation, giving up the kind of that distorted concern that we have with them. And then you were talking about having like attachment to the pleasurable things and aversion to the painful things, and that there was like a difference between suffering and pain. So can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. There's a nice saying I like that says, I don't know where it comes from, but I really like it. It's pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. For us now, pain is mandatory, suffering is mandatory. But from a Buddhist perspective, suffering is optional. But pain is just sensation. Like a classic example is, you know, well, now it's winter, but here in the summer, of course, let's say it's 40 degrees outside. And so we go out in 40 degrees and we have some heat on our face and so forth. And we go, oh, it's so hot. I'm suffering so much, suffering, too hot. And then, of course, we go into a sauna and it's 80 degrees, twice the heat. And we go, oh, so wonderful, so nice. What's going on there? And so the bottom line, the short answer, and the longer answer comes in the context of Vipassana. The short answer is that as long as we have grasping, then pain becomes suffering.
Okay, very interesting. Then Deepa has a question. I tend to get quite frustrated with my meditation practice, as doing only about 30 minutes of meditation daily doesn't seem to make too much difference. Do you think we can really progress with only 30 minutes or an hour or so if we meditate daily?
Another good saying is, if there is no expectation, there can be no frustration. So frustration comes from unrealistic expectations. So if we let go of expectations, then we can't be frustrated. So that's the first point. And what we saw in the slide already, shamatha training, in shamatha practice, in any practice, there's always two parts. There is meditation, and the second part is what we do for the rest of the day. And so often people sort of don't really do much for the second part. Maybe the first part they do. Maybe we diligently meditate, say 30 minutes every morning, diligent. But then we jump up, and what do we do for the rest of the day? We run around like crazy for 14, 15 hours. So which one of those is going to win out? 30 minutes of mindful meditation and 14 hours of mindlessly reacting to things. I think I know which one's going to win out. So therefore, we see in this program, and we're going to address this very point in actually session 7 and session 8, is that we need to integrate this into daily life. We need to continue to cultivate, in this case, in terms of, we're talking shamatha practice, we need to continue to cultivate mindfulness throughout the day. If we do those two things together, we can progress. And then the other point, and that's another thing we're going to look at in session 7 in terms of that prerequisites, is that often we have, in the modern world, we have quite dysfunctional lifestyles. And we have a lot of mental afflictions, a lot of suffering and so forth. And we hear that meditation can be good. So what we do is we add meditation to our life. We don't want to change anything in our life. We just want to use meditation to, you know, calm it down a bit and less problems in our life. We don't often address our lifestyle. And so that's adding a little bit of shamatha to a dysfunctional lifestyle is a little bit like putting a Band-Aid on a festering wound. It's going to cover things up a little bit, but it's not going to heal anything. So one of the things we're going to look at, and that's one of the prerequisites in session 7, is how can we look at our life, set up our life in such a way such that we'll get maximum benefit out of this. And one of the things that we already touched on in this session is our worldview. As long as our worldview is that the source of my happiness and the source of my suffering is out there in the world, we're not really going to go anywhere with this shamatha practice, even if we're practicing a lot, because we're just chasing after the 8 worldly concerns. So if we can shift the worldview that the real underlying source of my happiness and suffering is within, on that basis, then we're going to be much more enthusiastic about shamatha practice to begin with. And we have that as our framework for shamatha practice. And then we meditate 30 minutes in the morning, and we work on integrating that into daily life. If we do those things together, we're going to notice significant progress. So that's the short answer. More detail will come, particularly in session 7 and session 8 of this program, of this course.
Because Deep has kind of said that surely there has to be some kind of expectation. So is that how we sort out between aspiring and expectations?
Yeah, exactly. We basically, I think His Holiness Dalai Lama has once or said before, expectation is the foundation for failure. So we need to throw out all expectations. I mean, get rid of expectations. Because expectation is, we're already jumping into the future. So get rid of all expectations, rather know what the goal is, know how to move towards the goal, and then in the present moment, work towards that goal with no expectation. just with, like you said, aspiration. If we aspire to a worthwhile goal, and we know what the goal is clearly, we know what we need to do to move towards that goal, then we put whatever effort we can manage in the present moment and work towards that goal. And then we will never get frustrated. Our mind will remain joyful and will persevere because we'll know we're doing the right thing and we know we're going in the right direction. Then there'll be no frustration and the mind will be joyful. Soon as expectation comes in, and usually our expectations in spiritual matters are completely unrealistic. Soon as expectation comes in, hope and fear comes in, and then it's a big mess. And then frustration comes in, we get tight, and then we give up. So just get rid of expectation. Rather, set healthy aspirations. Know what you're doing, know what the goal is, put effort, and then be happy.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So there are probably a couple of other questions, Glenn, but I think you will cover them in the coming topics of the next
if there's any questions there that will more likely come up, and we've run out of time, so if there's one more question relating to this, maybe we can field that.
Just in those 14 to 15 hours after the meditation session, how do we not act crazy and impede our progress?
Yeah, again, we're going to talk about that in session 7 and 8, and I'll probably touch on those points a few times in other sessions as well. So I think that's best left for the later sessions. Definitely, I'm going to cover that in most detail in the last session, but also in earlier sessions as well.
And the last one, do we need to be proficient in practicing shamatha before practicing vipassana?
Okay, good question. Depends what we mean by proficient. Do we need to actually achieve shamatha before we start vipassana? No, absolutely not. In fact, you will find that we will not be able to actually achieve shamatha without some vipassana to help support us in the practice. Do we need to be proficient? Yes. Proficient in the sense that if we can't focus on the breath more than a few seconds, I think trying to put a lot of effort into vipassana practice on that basis is really putting a lot of effort for little gain. So therefore, yes, to put effort into shamatha, to make the mind more calm, more clear, more focused. And then on that basis, we can begin some vipassana practice. And then, of course, continue to practice shamatha and vipassana, and eventually, as we saw, they'll become unified much later. So yes, proficiency in terms of we need to have some reasonable attention skills, but we don't need to have, of course, a high level of shamatha to begin vipassana. So that's the short answer.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I think we've run over time there a little bit. So that's all we've got for this session. So the next session, of course, will be this Thursday, so same time again. And in the second session now, we'll go into the mindfulness of breathing practice, and we'll do this full body breath practice, focusing on sensations of the breath throughout the body. And also in this session, as we saw earlier, we'll be looking at what sort of qualities are we cultivating in the shamatha practice, and what sorts of objects can we focus on in this practice. So that's it for this session. And maybe we just sit for a few moments to dedicate this session. So we can dedicate just based on the motivation that you set in the earlier meditation. So we can make it individual. So just spend a few moments to dedicate all the efforts that we've put together in this session this evening. Okay, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all on Thursday at 7 o'clock. So until then, stay safe, stay well, see you Thursday.